This week, not one, but two very special guests here on the program. Don Pizzette from IT Pro TV joins us, and none other than Doug White is with me in studio, sitting right next to me. It's awesome. We're going to talk about the enterprise security news following the money threat intelligence for financial institutions, application DOS in microservice architectures, SealPath, Ping Identity, and Oracle to round out the news. Our topic for today is network security architecture. I have 5 common questions that I get about your network security architecture, and I'm sure that our illustrious panel will weigh in as well. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. This week, and talk about them as it relates to enterprise security. You're going to do great.
I think that people think that you and I talk like every day at night. You know, It's like, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of a bit of an exhausting week. And I think that we noticed that a little bit in the stories for this week as well.
LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, Pwn Phone, and Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 60 of Enterprise Security Weekly. It's Wednesday, September 6th, 2017. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, here in G-Unit Studios with, to my left, Mr. Doug White.
Hello.
What's up, Doug?
Hey, the usual. It's just like, I'm here.
You're here. You got John had the last minute cancellation today, unfortunately.
I know.
So
I was wondering what happened to John. I was like,
I'm not sure. He gets captured by ninjas sometimes.
Could be storms, dark of night, the end of the world, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all those kind of things come right again. And just, it's like, who knows what's going to happen at any given point in time. So.
Oh,
I wore my IT Pro shirt.
You did. Very nice.
I had already seen it. Don was going to be here, so
yeah.
I was like,
Well, Don Pizzette is on the lines via Skype. Don, welcome to the program today.
Hey, thanks for having me on it. And let me tell you, I am blown away by the opportunity to be on the show. It's going to be all storm puns all episode.
Oh, the whole episode. Yeah. So, Don, you said you've recently recorded and broadcast a segment on disaster recovery, as it's timely as the Hurricane Irma. Is that?
Yeah, Irma.
What is the latest on the storm? I feel like Don is our weather correspondent in Florida.
Yeah, he should have one of those yellow slickers on right now.
Yeah. Going. Live from Gainesville, Don Pizzette, our weather correspondent. Don, what's the weather like in Gainesville?
I need to get the rubber boots, and you just can't believe a weatherman unless they're standing in at least 6 inches of water, right? That's the rule.
Have somebody throw a couple of cats behind you while you're
have someone with a squirt gun squirting you in the face.
Exactly. Fighting his way to cybersecurity.
No natural disaster is a good disaster, right? There's no such thing. But hurricanes, honestly, are probably one of the better ones because you have time to plan. You know they're coming. It's not like an earthquake where it's sudden. So we do get to joke around about it now because it hasn't hit.
Right.
It's not so funny after it hits, but it does give you a little extra time to plan. So it's a little different.
Yeah, it's a nice dread period that you get to have. So as opposed to that just sudden screaming, you get that long period of just impending doom. That kind of.
Well, and I think IT people in general really dread situations like this. I mean, we just had a lightning storm a few hours ago here in the studio. And, well, not in the studio, it was outside the studio. But inside the studio, we lost like a power conditioner.
Yeah.
Just like for no, I mean, we don't understand why.
Lightning.
You had lightning, but I don't know. It was plugged into a UPS, which was kind of strange. But
IT dreads all these storms because that was always
means
when
change. Change is bad.
When you get 911, just when everybody else is running like hell, for the freeway to and you're getting like come in.
It's like, exactly.
We need you here. We got to have everybody. Got all hands on deck. It's like could I flee with everyone else? But
right.
It's like no. I'm gonna. Of course, I will say.
Lighted blue, Doug.
I know. When I worked at the bank had walls so thick that you could look through the glass one time and we could see stuff hitting the glass on the 4th floor. I was like, something bad's happening outside, and we were literally up against the glass, and it was like I don't know. And we went outside, there'd been like a tornado, and we didn't even really notice it. It was like the Federal Reserve Bank. He's like, we'll be there, but we were still worried about the mainframe because we had to hold it, and you have to pet it, and talk.
Well, yeah, because anytime, and Don and Doug know this well because you guys have been around for a while in IT. Anything sometime like when something turns off and then back on again, either it fixes it or, in this case, usually bad things happen.
It never comes on again.
Yes.
It's like hard drive arrays going down is always a favorite. This thing been running for 13 years, and it goes down, and then like 2 of the drives don't come back up. And you're going, you got RAID 6, right? And they're like, what? RAID? What is RAID?
So, Don, how are things at IT Pro TV? I know we have an announcement here. Have people been using the supervisor portal, and what are some of the feedback? I love this feature. I think it's great. It allows you to track your employees' progress in training and assign them modules all through IT Pro TV. I think it's a fantastic feature. How have things been going with this newer offering, I should say?
It's been working out really well. We got a lot of feedback from our customers, especially our corporate customers, and that was one of the ways that we could help them better is if they assign training to somebody, how do they know they actually did it, or just finding out what's there. And we're about to launch a massive security track with the guys from Red Lion, and a lot of companies have been looking for that to be able to leverage it with their employees and be able to track it. So the supervisor portal combined with that are really two exciting things. It's a lot of activity going on here, so that's why we hate to slow down for the hurricane. But it's a lot of fun.
So now, Josh and Scott, are they doing end user awareness training or IT security training, or a combination of both?
We're focusing on the high end, on the penetration tester, on the IT security officer with practical skills. There's a lot of certification training out there, and there's a big gap in how you take that and apply it into the business world. So Scott and Josh from Red Lion, they're working on basically retrieving some of the best talent out there in the security field, bringing them down here and actually teaching people what you should be doing out there in the real world. It's critical information these days, and unfortunately it gets kind of lost in the mix of fundamentals in theory that you get a lot of other places. So we're excited to kind of shore that up, but definitely not end user. It's going to be complex.
Fantastic. Our webinar is today, actually, with Domain Tools. I'm very excited about it. Joff Thayer, myself, and Tim Helming from Domain Tools are giving a presentation on DNS blacklisting. If you miss it, make sure you subscribe to securityweekly.com/insider. Go there, subscribe. And we'll make that content available. If you haven't registered, you likely will have to register afterwards with Domain Tools to view the content. But it's well worth it. Joff and I have kind of summarized a lot of our work that we put into basically from necessity. Like, I'm at home and I'm on my phone and I click a link on Facebook and I'm like, there's a lot of ads in here. I feel really dirty. I'm wiping my phone and starting over. So to avoid having to do that every time I click a link on Facebook, we've come up with some methods that can allow you to block those advertisements using DNS, which we think is the best place for that. And then Domain Tools is kind of saying, well, they have some commercial solutions, and the benefits that you get from them that build upon our concepts that we've used largely open source tools for are really, really awesome. And I encourage our users.
You need that at home and away. I mean, at work and at home.
You do, yeah. So use the free ones at home, and then at work, it's a very valid method for basically preventing bad from even entering your environment.
Right, and it's doable for not that much money at this point at home. I mean, I know at enterprise you're having to pay for commercial licenses, but at home it's like you need it because everybody at your house is doing stuff online. You've got all kinds of gadgets that are doing things online, and like Paul said, when you click on something and all of a sudden 50 ads pop up on the screen, you're going, uh-oh.
Yep. You're thinking malware. The first story that we have here is Follow the Money, Threat Intelligence for Financial Institutions. What's your take, Don and Doug, about threat intelligence for financial organizations? I've got some of my thoughts and beliefs, and I've gotten asked this question quite a bit. But I want to hear from you both. When you hear threat intelligence in the same sentence as a financial institution, is this a good thing, a bad thing, or what's the differentiator?
Well, for me, threat intelligence is necessary for everyone, because basically, as you go out in the world now, there are multi-tiered threats against you. So that's everything from the vector of just some kid that's sitting in a high school somewhere to nation states who are targeting you for whatever reason. And if you don't have some kind of assessment of what's going on, you're really going to be at a loss. You're going to be at a disadvantage. And when you start getting into financials are huge targets because, do we really need to go there? And people have been robbing banks since there have been banks. And so since there's a bank and there's a way to rob it or harass it, and everybody hates banks anyway, so why not? So you really need that, to me, that intelligence piece that people haven't thought about a lot in physical security, because physical security intelligence is just about look outside and see if there's a guy coming. Maybe you sit around and think about it a little bit, or you hire me and I come in and I think about, well, could you get through that door? But the truth is when you start thinking about virtual threats and all these vectors, it's the whole world. You can no longer see it coming. So you can't have a guard in a tower watching down the street and see a guy coming with a rifle. You don't know it's coming, and if you're not on top of that, you are going to get hammered. So I'm a fan.
That's a good argument for threat intelligence. Don?
At Black Hat this year, it was overwhelming, the amount of vendors that were there with threat intelligence software and solutions. You saw it at RSA too. Everybody's got a threat intelligence product. In the financial industry, I get a little frustrated. I've worked in the banking industry, and I get frustrated with a lot of banks that will connect systems to the internet, connect systems to larger networks than they should. And we'll talk more about this in network security architecture later. But just because a system can be connected to the internet doesn't mean that it should. And that's where a lot of these attacks come from. And they're trying to do threat intelligence to find these attacks that haven't been discovered yet, when if they had just isolated their systems a little more, it'd be super easy to detect unauthorized access, because you're much more controlling of what is on each network. So I think there's a lot that financial institutions can do to secure their systems without deploying these crazy, brand new threat intelligence products that haven't really been tested and truly proven in the field. But we might see that change over the next few years as these products evolve a bit more and become more commonplace.
Well, and I think you have to have a plan, Don. I agree with you, but I think all too often we don't have a plan, and that's why we get in these jams, because we start plugging things. I agree with that. We plug things in. We need to make it work. I was telling somebody that yesterday. I was like, what's the first thing that happens in IT? If somebody calls down and says, my email doesn't work, get us online, bring us up. And you say, well, we really need to do a full assessment of this. Should we put this box on the system or not? And they go, get it working. And then the next thing you know, it's on, and then it sits there for 10 years working, and it becomes a threat that you don't even know about. So again, this sort of surveying the landscape, looking off in the distance and trying to evaluate this is great, but you have to be able to do it. And in physical security, I can do it with my binoculars. In the virtual world, that's not possible. So I've got to have some kind of mechanism. But yeah, don't jump on the next big thing, or you'll spend a lot of money and you may not get anything.
I think when it comes to detecting fraud, financial institutions have had great success using threat intelligence, because in a financial transaction, it's a very finite thing. There's only so many variables. There's only so many ways in which a financial transaction is supposed to work. There's really only so many ways to influence that before there's checks and balances that pick it up. So if you've got knowledge about attacks that are happening somewhere else, you can certainly monitor for those or harden against those from a transaction standpoint. Because a transaction is not like a computer that's browsing the web and memory attacks and malware. And there's lots of course, threats on that side. But if you look at just the transaction piece, we know how a transaction is supposed to take place, so we should know how to.
And you get a lot of data too, because we used to do all these transactions, and I used to write one-offs to look at transactions, and we knew what they looked like because we have millions of them every day. We're going through the system, so when I could see a one-off, sometimes it was legit, but we investigated those really on an individual basis. There just weren't that many of them, so I would see a transaction that had like a strange header on it, or it had a strange routing number on it, and you go, that's odd. And sometimes it would be like, oh, that's a bank that never ever does wires, but they just did one. They're very
machine learning in that transaction-based environment is much easier than trying to pinpoint other computers that are doing much more complex systems.
Because it is a very sort of static model of how things, and it changes fairly slowly. I mean, the banks don't just suddenly say, oh, let's go a whole new system. It's like because everything has to change at once. So I agree with you. I think that's right.
Also, kind of in the banking news, Ping Identity is supporting, apparently the UK has an open banking framework, which is interesting because I always thought of banks as really using somewhat security and obscurity to their advantage. The industry only really needs to know about certain things. They don't need to release that to the public. They're very, very tight-lipped about their security as well, I also believe. So to have an open banking standard, which could be a good thing in the context of what we're talking about, if we know that there is an open standard that this is the way things should communicate, it's again something we can apply machine learning to as well. And these are standards in which vendors can adopt, and Ping is one of the ones that is adopting them.
Well, when I worked at the Fed, they shared a lot of information, though. I mean, among banks, because we certainly...
Among banks, they share.
Among banks. Oh, there was no open banking framework outside the banking system, but you know, there was a Bank of America was across the street, and we literally walked over there a couple times just to say, I'm going to show you something, and took like a printout of it and said, have you seen this? And when the guy went, no, we haven't seen it. What do you think it is? And I'm like, I don't know, but we're going to look into it.
Yeah. FSISAC is an organization.
And then the Fed disseminated information even way back then across districts. So they had all these branch offices, and they would actually disseminate information, not so much about cybersecurity stuff because it didn't really exist, but about technology issues. And because it was standardized across the banks, they had to participate. So you want to send a wire, you got to use the same standard I have. So there's kind of an open standard for those kind of transactions among banks. But outside of that, they're not going to share anything.
Right.
They don't want you to know.
Don, does this jive with your experience in finance?
Yeah, you know, a good bit of that I think is going to come from the UK because, like, in the UK, the government is really good. Some people say really bad, but really good about creating frameworks like that. Like, I mean, that's where ITIL came from. Here's how you can run your IT department. So to have a documented infrastructure for running a bank, that's a kind of common practice to them, which is good. Here in the US, we have the FDIC, who's very similar. So if you're a bank that's insured by the FDIC, they've got the set of rules and guidelines that you should be following to secure your system. So if you know a bank is FDIC insured, you've got a pretty good idea of how their security is configured. Now, they might be going above and beyond that. Hopefully they are. But you kind of know what their minimum standards are. And for a bank, you're exactly right in that they should know the type of information that comes in and out. But it can be really hard to identify something like a malicious transaction. And there was the bank in Southeast Asia last year where there were millions of dollars transferred out, and it would have been way more, except the hackers made a typo, and so they kind of caught themselves. That kind of stuff, when it's a straight-up transaction, when it's going through these frameworks that interconnect international banks, that's really difficult to locate. And the more checks and guards they put in place, the slower those transactions become. So it's one of those kind of balancing acts between security versus convenience. And right now, I think they're still learning what that proper balance is.
The next story comes from a sponsor of ours, actually, Signal Sciences. And I thought it was a very interesting talking point. They're doing, I think it's a free webcast, I believe. And so they're focusing on the container security problem for this particular webcast. And what they've said is that unlike traditional network DDoS that focuses on network pipes and edge resources, our talk focuses on identifying and targeting expensive calls within a microservices architecture using their complex interconnected relationships to cause the system to attack itself with a massive effect. I thought in all of the security things that come across my desk, I was like, wow, I want to know more about that. Like, that sounds really cool.
This all back to IoT again. I mean, it's really that. It's kind of the flock of birds thing. It's like there's this massive flock of birds sitting out in the field, and somebody stirs those birds up, and they don't necessarily gain anything from it, but the birds all go crazy and start swirling around. And I think that back into that IoT, I keep talking about this thing where I've got my drones floating around my head to protect me and my kids or whatever. And as that world evolves, being able to trigger a talk just a few packets from each one of those devices, get them to talk, get them to act, get them to something, and all of a sudden, guess what happens? You've got this flood of information comes hitting you, and it becomes a gigantic problem inside your network. So it's just like a bomb sitting there waiting to go off if somebody can trigger that thing and then just cause everybody to flash all at once. It would be like getting all the Cisco routers to send like a hello packet, over OSPF or something. If you could cause it to do that, and every single device in the entire network did that all at once, it could cause this sort of flashbang effect in the network.
So we're routing protocol vulnerability similar to that, Doug.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, Don? Container security is a nightmare, and the reason is just kind of the way that containers behave. They're designed to be temporary, small, quick to deploy, that you might need one container, you might need 1,000 containers. They come and go. When you look at traditional host-based intrusion protection systems, things like Carbon Black, right? You'd license that per desktop or per server. But with containers, they don't really lend themselves to that kind of licensing model. It's really difficult to protect individual containers. So I think the approach of saying, you know what, screw it, we're not going to monitor the individual container. Let's monitor the traffic in between them and the transactions that they do. I think that's really smart, because that would remove that dependency of let's understand where these containers are or how many of these containers there are. It's just let's focus on how many transactions. I think that's a brilliant approach.
Yeah, and I think it's not an entirely new concern, but a new way to execute a lot of the attacks that we classify, in security today, such as distributed denial of service. And typically we think of it, network architecture talk will probably touch on it, right? How you protect the network from some kind of denial of service. But like Don's saying, now we've got thousands of containers running. How do we prevent, going back to what Doug was saying, like that one little event that can trigger this call that all of a sudden stuff starts going horribly wrong?
And I think that's just going to be probably an avenue of research like container hardening, which is just going to have to happen the same way we did server hardening and the same way we did whatever hardening. You've got all these containers. Somebody's going to have to figure out, how do I probe all of them? What tools are there? What pieces of API can be talked to? And if there's openings in that container shell that somebody can query an API with just a little instruction, that's going to be the thing that can trigger this just sort of, and all the containers start trying to chatter to each other, and then it just...
Yeah, there's at least 3 startups that have come across our show that we've been talking about. One, we interviewed StackRox. There's Twistlock, and there's another one that Matt Alderman is working with as well. They all take a slightly different point of view of the problem, and it'll be interesting to see which techniques in points of view emerge as some of the standard ways in which we're able to. But I do think
it's a volume problem rather than a research problem per se, because some of it's the same concepts that we use in everything else. I mean, there's not really some new thing here. It's just about, now there's all these little small things. So it's like worrying about molecular hacking or something. It's like, if that's a threat, then there's a lot more of it. So you're going to have to figure it out. And if it can evolve and it can change and mutate, then all of a sudden you've got a big problem.
This next announcement is just really kind of dizzying. So Boldon James, the leading provider of data classification and secure messaging solutions, and SealPath, a leading provider of user-friendly document security protection, today announced the integration of their secure solutions to allow enterprise users to automatically protect information that has been manually classified in one click. What's the problem we're trying to solve with all of this?
So,
Don?
I've run into this over the years. It's so frustrating that as a corporation, you have data, right? Let's say you have customer data, and maybe you generate reports and they get printed out, right? That kind of data, if it's left on a desk, somebody can get it. But even in a digital format, somebody could email it to someone outside of the company, right? So maybe you have your quarterly P&L, and so it's the financials for your company, and somebody gets it and they email it out to a competitor, right? Maybe it's a corporate espionage, that kind of thing. Well, if you have DRM of some sort, then you can make it where that document can only be opened on your company computer, or you can make it where the document can be opened, but it can't be printed. And those technologies always have a common failure, which is that they're typically agent-based. They've got some kind of software that's required to make them work, and it's a nightmare for the legitimate users as well as the people that are trying to break into them. They usually tie you down to a particular operating system, and that's part of the problem. But the biggest problem with all of them is usually if you want to secure a document, you've got to turn that on. You've got to say, all right, I want this document to be secured and nobody can print it. So if you've got a classification system, maybe you've got like a I don't know, an EMC Centera or something like that, when you drop documents on there, they're getting classified. They're actually getting top secret or whatever assigned to them, that it could automatically enable that protection so that if the document was sent outside, if you had an Edward Snowden who filled up a USB key of the data, that it wouldn't be any good once it got out of the business. Now, it sounds great, and if it works as described, that's perfect, but it's been tried so many times, and they all kind of fall apart in the end. There's always something that makes them just incredibly inconvenient to use, or they just get completely broken. So I wish them the best. I hope it works because it's sorely needed. But boy, is it difficult to implement.
And there's transformative classification too, where if I have a classified document here that's in a folder and it's got red tape around it or black edges or whatever, and I have all these rules I'm supposed to follow, but I take that document and I scan it into a PDF on a printer or whatever, or on a scanner, then I've transformed that document that was stamped top secret with the black tape around it
digital.
And as it moves into the digital world, we may not have the same mechanisms in place to try to protect it. And I think that's some of what they're worried about, because there's vast stores of manual documents, of physical documents, tapes, all kinds of things that are classified as secret, top secret. And when you get into enterprise, it's even worse, because we have stuff that's not quite as threatening as nuclear launch codes. So we don't tend to be as adherent to those rules as the military does or somebody like that. And all of a sudden, you've just got this really difficult to manage situation with all these different things. So the agents are difficult to attach in a consistent way, and suddenly you've got stuff just leaking through the cracks all over the place.
Well, and so hearing you guys talk, which has been very informative, and it's been awesome for me to learn. So what I think the industry that I've identified as wanting this technology today is the entertainment industry, who's just lost several scripts and content and leaked out. And it's funny, I remember at one time for the X-Files movie, they printed it on what was red paper with black ink, so it couldn't be copied. Which is kind of interesting. But of course, you can just take a picture. I mean, there's lots of ways to circumvent this technology, but I can certainly see the entertainment industry, and I hope this is the case, maybe lead and fund a lot of the research to help solve this problem, because they're suffering in a big way right now as they become the target of a lot of groups.
And that's very valuable stuff, because I mean, even if you want to build your brand, being able to leak something like that makes you a famous person on Twitter. The fact that you were the person who got it. So there's two things there. One is non-repudiation as well. So you don't want people to be able to deny that they knew this was classified and they were circumventing it. I mean, so that leads you to legal recourse against them, because if somebody says, I don't know how I got this, I found it on a website, I didn't steal it, all I did was post it, I posted a link to it, there's not a lot of non-repudiation there. So if you have to circumvent these controls, that's certainly one way to deal with that. But I agree with you 100% that the entertainment industry is very interested in this, but also financials and other people who have all kinds of data that's maybe at a variable levels of classification that aren't very well controlled.
Oracle's making a play into injecting AI into its IoT Cloud Portfolio, which sounds like a whole bunch
Skynet awakes.
Yeah, a whole bunch of hoopla, right? Well, it is very much like Skynet, right? However, it's very focused on the supply chain in IoT. And I think it goes back to our conversation about financial transactions. In your supply chain, if you're using IoT devices or purpose-built small computers that aid in the supply chain management, that again is a very controllable, very finite environment. And if you're going to apply AI or machine learning to this type of environment, I think that it is kind of likened to be able to implement that kind of technology, because it's a more controlled environment. And of course, supply chain just change over time. But I think if I know that the packages are moving from here to there, and there's a machine that's connected to a device that does this specific task, that's much easier to apply some type of artificial intelligence to monitor that and make course corrections along the way than apply it to something like antivirus, where there's millions of attackers across the globe constructing software that's going to do any number of evil things. That's a way more difficult problem when Carbon Black and Cylance and a bunch of other vendors are trying to solve, right? But when we look at what Oracle is doing in terms of the supply chain and IoT, I think it's a more solvable problem. You guys agree?
Absolutely, and I'll split hairs and say machine learning and AI is not quite the same thing.
They're not. No, they're certainly not.
I mean, machine language down on the bottom end of that, which is really what we're talking about here, because when I can really model something, and I can model supply chain. I mean, even when there's fuzzy decisions out there on the horizon somewhere, I can model supply chain. I can say this bolt needs to get shipped in a bin on this belt over to that other station when they need it. I can try to do that. That's machine learning, just to try to establish what the best loading pattern is for the hand. AI starts to get into a much more fuzzy model of maybe I could predict what's going on. Maybe I could try to guess what you need
and make a change based on that.
Exactly. I'm going to change the way this works based on that. So the robot's arms are no longer going to reach right, left. It's going to reach right, left, because that's a faster technique. That's starting to get into the AI
when it
model
does that on its own.
Exactly.
Right.
So that when the IoT starts to learn right, left works so much better than right, left. That's where we've kind of proceeded between machine learning and off into this AI world of the arms are now learning how, or maybe instead of reaching a full extension, I just move this part of the arm. Yeah. That's really starting to get into that AI, really fuzzy stuff at that point.
So, Don, I mean, do you guys have robots at IT Pro TV that are doing the training now? Is that the AI has progressed?
Boy, I wonder how that would affect labor laws. So, when you're talking about supply chain, we mentioned these IoT devices, and we mentioned things like, robotic arms. And these are not like the IoT that we have a lot of exploits with and other compromises where, it's something developed by a company that didn't spend time developing security on it. It is connected to the internet. When it's a robotic arm on a supply line, it's typically not internet connected. It's developed by companies that spend the time to make sure they secure the infrastructure, that it's not able to be communicated with. So tacking on AI to that to make it smarter, and then tacking on anything to monitor it for security, a company like Oracle, they're in a good position to do that because they've got such a large data set to work with. I think it's a no-brainer they would get into that space and help to make sure they secure it up.
Yeah, there's a lot of, if you want to read some really businessy and cyber security marketing speak, read towards the end of this article. Wow. Smart Connected Factory offers incident detection, root cause analysis, and smart resolution for manufacturing facilities, while Digital Fleet Management offers real-time shipment tracking, risk management, and logistics synchronization.
That's what they read to people at Guantanamo Bay to get them to confess, right?
All right, with that, we're going to take a short break, come back, and talk about network security architecture. We'll be right back.